make us more human. Awesome. Kia ora, hello.
Hello, Kaushik. I've put the link to the Miro board in there today as well. We will be using it again. So if you want to get that open and ready, you're more than welcome. Can have a little poke around in there. I've put a little bit of the data from our survey in there as well.
So maybe we give people maybe another minute. We're already sitting at, yes, 22 participants, which is great. So I'm joining from Melbourne, Victoria, and I will be moderating today's session. Prue will be our key presenter. And having said that, Prue, like, I should introduce you to the audience, and then we kick off the module. I know that you have so much material to go through. So Prue is such an annoying person.
You nailed it. Nailed the
Prue is one of the nicest people I know, but that is not the reason I have high respect for Prue. Prue is one of the rare practitioners who is also a thinker, coming to safe system, coming to sustainable mobility, active travel. She is full of ideas. Recently, she has been appointed as an expert in the Expert Advisory Committee for Austroads, really path-building project, charting a path to zero. And she has been sharing fantastic thoughts with us. She's actually a really wonderful professional as well. I mean, in terms of credentials, let me read through the list I have here, because I have a list for her. Prue has authored and presented contents for Race Priority Crossing Technical Guideline for Queensland. She has contributed to several publications of technical guidance on race crossing for roundabouts and different parts of the system. She has captured the feedback from the community in terms of parents, schools, different communities. She's actually one of the great advocates of community-led design in Australia and New Zealand, an approach that I think is very crucial when it comes to local councils. And having said that, Prue is also an expert in that area and has helped, local councils across Queensland and other places. Prue is committed to safe system and achieving the zero ambitious target for us, and also a specialist in transport. It's a CP Eng with 20 years of experience. And I don't want to eat more into your time, Prue, because the list goes on and on. So having said that, the floor is yours, and best of luck.
Thank you, Hafez. Another lovely introduction. Really appreciate it. So anyway, we are getting into the where of raised priority crossings today. I'll just click through that. There's my contact details. So in this session, we'll be drilling down a little bit more. We were kind of looking at the last session of why we do raised crossings, and this time we're getting a little bit more into the detail on where they're needed and how they can meet our needs in different places. So we'll start today with a little bit of a reflection of what crossings are and why we use them. We'll look at where we are now, and we'll have a look at some of our homework results where we think about what's our current position on where we think as practitioners raised crossings can be used, and have a look at some of our existing thoughts. I've got some of the data from other practitioners as well, so we can think about that. We'll then break it into greenfield sites and where we could be considering crossings in greenfield. Then we'll look at brownfield. We'll go through some of the rules about where that kind of limits what we can do, and how we can challenge those rules, get the best use out of it, a case study, and then we'll hopefully bring it all together. So as Hafez said, we've got quite a bit to get through today. As we're going along, feel free to ask your questions in the chat anytime, and then Hafez can interrupt me and we can get to it there. So just feel free, questions anytime, but there'll be some activities and things as well. So first of all, our reflection, what is a raised crossing? So we have we've got three criteria really for what we're thinking about when we're thinking about a raised crossing. It's a crossing for path users, so it needs to have crossing connections and provides for people walking or riding. It needs to have some kind of speed control, so usually a raised flat top road hump, but there's other ways we can get that speed control. And it needs to give path priority to path users. So these are the three kind of things that we define in terms of this is the raised crossing we're talking about. Just a couple of things about in terms of what is not a raised crossing. Now, Bridget will go into this further. There are quite a few of these around the network. They still deliver some improvements to the network, but there's some issues with them as well. So the crossing here that we see here in both situations, it's raised, but there's no priority to path users. So this helps. It's not really as explaining then the raising it and the providing the delineation across the road kind of implies that path users might have priority, but they don't. So what we often see in these situations is these little signs popping up everywhere to compensate for the fact that it's not self-explaining. So if you look at these signs in both these situations, that's what we're seeing. Interestingly enough, I was walking with my children on this crossing on the left, and I asked them, I said, oh, who's got priority here? And he kind of looked and he said, oh, we do, we go first. And so that's the thing. I kind of like going back to that kid test, as they're quite logical. People aren't necessarily going to stop and read a sign that says pedestrians give way. So action time. This one's going to be pretty quick. What we're going to do is we're just going to apply some of that, and we're going to be saying, what I want you to do is just use the chat to say thumbs up or thumbs down or yes or no for each of the crossings that we're about to show. So is it a raised crossing or is it not a raised crossing? We have our very judgmental wombat here. He's got strong opinions, so he will be coming up at the end to remind us how we go. Okay, first one. Is this a raised crossing? What do we think? Yes, no. Yes, no, we've got a bit of a mixture here. Interesting. Does anyone want to, our judgmental wombat says no. Now, it's interesting. So one of these signs, this can be a little bit of a giveaway. Pedestrians must give way to traffic. So yes, it is raised. Yes, it's delineated as a crossing, but pedestrians don't actually have right of way in this situation. And so it is a bit ambiguous. Sometimes vehicles give way, sometimes they don't. And I think, you know, it's it's ambiguous in our comments as well here. So that's interesting. Is this a raised crossing? What do we think? Yes. Yes, I think we've got consistency here. Let's see how judgmental wombat. Yep, approving of that. It's obvious this one's located next to a roundabout. What about this one? Is this a raised crossing? No. Yeah, I think we're all fairly consistent here. Yeah, no, this one's not a raised crossing. I'm not sure what the design intent was in this one. This is actually the exit of a really large school. The delineation kind of suggests that people walking might have right of way. Technically, they do have right of way because it's actually a driveway, but there's nothing to reinforce that to the drivers. So it's just, we don't meet that obvious criteria in terms of who has right of way. Yeah, so it adds confusion. What about this one? Is this a raised crossing? Yes. So this one's got a bit of confusion as well. Technically, it is a raised crossing because we have the give way signs and line marking here. I probably should get a photo that's taken more from the driver's perspective to indicate that. It doesn't seem to have the same level of obviousness that we have with a raised zebra crossing, but there's reasons that this has been used in Queensland in terms of providing for bike riders as well as people walking. So it is a raised crossing, but yeah, we really need to zoom in on having this signage and delineation that indicates that. And what about this one? This is our last one. No. This is I think my chat's going a little bit slow. So we've got no. Yep. It's not a raised crossing. If you see in the background over here, you'll see that there is a raised platform. Sometimes where we put those close to the crossing and either side of the crossing, it does provide that speed control that we're looking for in terms of defining it as, you know, meeting the 3 criteria for speed control, priority, and a path. But in this situation, they don't have one on the approach. And if you don't have it on the approach to the crossing, it's too late by the time you've slowed people down. So we need that speed control on the approach. And Ken will talk about that a little bit later. So judgmental wombat. So where are we now? So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a look through some of our homework assignment. Yeah.
We have one question in the chat room when we were having the exercises, and Pete said, what is the role of priority? So is it like, you know, is it a giveaway that, you know, defines a race crossing, or what is the role of it in the definition of a race crossing?
So we will talk about the 2 different types of traffic regulations a little bit later in the rules around it, but basically it's either the pedestrian crossing signage and line marking, which is the wombat crossing, so what you can see on both Hafez and I's backgrounds. In the other crossings with that yellow crossing, that's where it's used give way lines and signage. So the give way line is what enforces the priority, and the give way sign reinforces that with the 2 pedestrians and cyclists.
And if the pedestrian don't get that priority, that is not a race crossing.
No, not what we consider it for this course. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And there is, I should say too, there's in Austroads, there's guidance recommending against putting a raised crossing without dedicating priority, because it can be confused in terms of who has priority. There are, in some situations, people can do that and kind of rely on the ambiguity of it for everybody to slow down, but Austroads generally recommends against it. So in this section, what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at some of the data you collected during your walks. So as part of the homework assignment, we got you to fill out a survey. We did this for a couple of reasons. This can be a really easy way of communicating or finding out from your communities where they need crossings. Often people have fairly strong kind of trends emerge around where crossings are needed. So we wanted to give you that experience, and also to caption some data so we can have a look at where are practitioners currently thinking about putting crossings in. So we've got this example from the North Island in New Zealand, and I'll just start playing the video. Feel free, if this is your submission, to give us some more information. We'd love to hear. So what I really liked about this one is we've got a whole lot of different places. It looks like kind of a commercial area here. I noticed that we're identifying kind of the driveways and the side roads as well as mid-block crossings as needed. So I should say the red marks are where there's conflict, where it was identified that there's conflict, and the green markers are where we could potentially put a raised crossing in. It's hard to speak through this, but anyway, I'll just have to speed up. So we've got, you know, this is great. This is suggesting, yeah, there's a zebra crossing there. Let's add the safety features. Let's raise it. Side road crossings, we see again and again in surveys that these are an area of concern for people. There's lots of different movements to consider. I love this, that we seem to have a crossing outside of school. You know, if we raise that, we're going to make it safer for the people, the crossing supervisors, as well as providing it at all times of day and on weekend when we've got sport and things like that. I also like that this person has really thought about connections and issues around the neighbourhood as well, connecting this kind of school, and just some of these side roads can actually really be quite challenging for people, or neighbourhood collectors and roads like that. So I thought that was a really kind of interesting variety of locations where there was identified as conflict and where crossings could be considered, you know. And yeah, I think we could possibly, you know, consider all those situations for this kind of treatment in terms of being appropriate. Now it's just gone up again. I don't know why that's done that, but anyway, I've just got, you know, a couple of different crossing sites there to summarize that in terms of mid-block, side road, roundabout. We didn't have a really major road, but we had a commercial centre, community facilities and neighbourhoods there. Yeah. Now, I've got an example from near Wollongong in New South Wales. So we'll just have a look at this one. This was another really nice example. I've noticed on lots of the assignments, we've seen people identifying roundabouts as places where there's both conflicts and where we could see, consider raised crossings. So it's really interesting information. I know when we were trying to put together some of the guidance around prescribing raised crossings on roundabouts, it was quite difficult to provide to source data that talked about the challenges for pedestrians at roundabouts. It singled out kind of specific users at being a challenge, but in terms of the broader community, there wasn't a lot to support that roundabouts were a problem. Yet when you talk to people, it's a common experience. So I thought this was a really interesting site as well, in terms of, treat the roundabouts, and we can actually turn those from being really unpredictable environments into environments that are really consistent with safe system principles. Okay, so have we got any questions at the moment, Hafez?
Yes, we have 3 questions. 2 of them are about signage and line marking and question about the raised crossings. But I think the one that I find a bit more philosophical is Kathy's question. The language we use can be very confusing in describing a raised crossing. Why are we not specific? The raised bit is obvious, but the crossing part maybe needs more definition when talking about it. Whether it is for cyclists or pedestrians can be quite different. And what are your thoughts on that? And also the other 2 questions.
I think so. I think working with researchers lately has made me really aware of trying to use language that the community is using. And I think as practitioners, we need to get better at that. And I need to get better at that. Some of the feedback I've heard from people is that they call a crossing, like the ones behind me now, community members call that a crossing. That's crossing, but something like a refuge, they don't even call it a crossing because it doesn't let them go first. So I think making the language as easy to understand as possible is really important. I wanted to put something at the start of this presentation to kind of talk about the definitions that we're working with, because otherwise I find that there is confusion. I use the word wombat crossing an awful lot because it's referenced in the Australian Standard, and I'm very familiar with that term. But I've noticed other people aren't familiar with it, and I'm confusing people with that. So I don't know what the best terms are to use. I kind of use a mixture and raised crossing with the zebra crossing line marking and see if people understand what I mean there. But I think it's a really good question, and we need to get our language as obvious as possible and really check it when we're talking to community members. You'll see it later, but when I've surveyed community members about how they feel about different types of crossings, we've tried to use plain language, but we've also provided a photo. So that's the only way I think that we can accurately ask people, because everybody has something different in their head.
Nick's comment here is also quite helpful. Nick mentions Waka Kotahi having a good category of definitions and categorizing it in terms of providing support or being a primary safe system treatment. I
think great discussion, but I better keep going. But we can keep going with that a little bit later if we need to. Walk reflections. So that's where we're kind of checking for what are our own kind of walk reflection? What did we think about when we were identifying crossing sites? And so road safety, nearly everybody thought about road safety. Well, everybody thought about road safety. Nearly everyone thought about their own experiences crossing roads. Most people thought about places that noticed other people having difficulties. We get down to just over half of people thinking about children, thinking about, less than half people thinking about older people. So it's just interesting to kind of go through this and think, how broad am I thinking here? we all have unconscious biases. So we just kind of try and stretch that as much as we can, talk to other users, talk to other people. I find this one an interesting one. So I tried to avoid putting crossings on busy roads. Other groups have kind of had less of been, less of the people in the group have responded yes to that question. So they've been more comfortable to choose the road environment. Is sometimes appropriate, but yeah, appropriate, but it's often good to kind of think of it as the first, cheapest, most effective option if you can get it, if you can make the environment conducive to it. Let me see. And types of places that roads raised crossings are typically installed on. So we were fairly high there, and we've had lower in previous groups as well. And that's interesting. I guess one of the things we want to do in this course is say that these are a really strong treatment, and there's actually lots of places where they might be suitable and they can at least be considered. So yeah, it's kind of stretching boundaries to say, yep, we know where they've traditionally been used, but are there places we can use them as well as the traditional locations? Okay, so that's just summarizing our homework experiences. So that's about, getting that experience of being a survey participant. It's really good to go into that other role. And if you are doing these kind of engagement activities, encourage you to do that yourself, or to put, friends, colleagues, get them to do it and see what it feels like from the other side. Capture our pre-existing ideas about where crossings should be and who we're thinking about, the types of places people think, and the type we might consider crossings. It's just, I find it really helpful to be calibrating my judgment with other practitioners. So this is lovely data that we're getting here in terms of where people are thinking that there's conflict and where there's potentially could be treated with this treatment. Okay, so our next section is going into where are raised crossings needed in greenfield sites. So we've got two kind of concepts that we're applying here. We're looking at putting crossings in places where there's risk and also places where connection is needed. So we're looking at where that overlaps. So we've got to have a risk that we're treating and also the connection, a desire line. So in terms of how we approach risk, this is where we apply our safe system principle. So this is about, this is Australia and New Zealand. This is what we apply, safe system. It means that no one should be killed or seriously injured as a result of road crashes. So we can use this to help define in our networks where there might be risk in the types of sites. That ties, Faiz was talking about in the previous session about the safe system principles and how they underlie all of this. And the pedestrian trauma effect. So we're trying to cut off this before this all happens. No one killed or seriously injured as a result of road crashes. And the second component is connection. And so we've got various formats of looking at where connection's needed. We'll talk about it through methodologies in brownfield sites, but we'll also look at kind of desire lines, services, origins and destinations in kind of greenfield sites. Risks. I'm from Queensland, so I thought it was the most appropriate way to describe and have a memorable kind of image of risk in this situation. But if you're from New Zealand, this is the best I could come up with. Please, I'm happy to take feedback on this if there's something else that you consider. Victorians, people from New South Wales, hopefully that little spider covers it. But anyway, we'll all have our version of what is risky. So we're going to apply, these are called the sustainable safety principles. Now, I really like these principles. I have them as kind of a checklist in my head when I'm going out to site. When I want to understand what's working well or what isn't working well, I kind of go through these in my head. Now, there's other things that you can use, but I find this when you're getting down to that kind of detail of what to use and how is it working, this can be a really good system to pick up on all the different attributes. So it's a bit complicated, and this is probably the densest part of our session today, but we're going to go through these 5 factors, which is functionality, homogeneity, predictability, state of awareness, and forgivingness. These are referenced in promoting safe system in the planning process. They also come from some of the Vision Zero stuff overseas. They've been adapted slightly now, but very similar. So the first thing when we're implementing these safe system principles is to look at the functionality of a street. And so each street should be defined in this hierarchy and classified in a hierarchy according to its function. That's usually an access function or a through function. So if you look over here on the right, we've kind of got, a snapshot of a street network. And what we can see is that we've got our arterial roads, which have a through function. There's probably nothing that is classified as an arterial in this situation, a through function. So minimal access, minimal intersections. It's really designed to get things from A to B efficiently. Right down at the bottom, we have our local streets, which have an access or an exchange function. So that's when we've got people moving in different directions. So we've got access to houses, access to services, properties and things. In between, we have kind of our collector roads, and these have more of a through function, mid-block, and then an exchange function at intersections. So if we look at a road around here. So this is how theoretically we should be designing our road networks. In practice, it's not necessarily like that. But if we assign them and do this, then the roads will be less risky because they'll be trying to meet and achieve one function. But if we are trying to do everything, if we've got a through function going on and an access function, things get risky. So that's where to have more risk. So this is why we need to apply this principle of functionality of how our road hierarchy works, who has right of way, those kind of things will are impacted by the function of it. So where we can't achieve this kind of single functionality, what we need to do is aim to provide adequate safety with safe speeds. So they call them kind of grey roads. It's kind of defined as a through road, but it's also much. It gets risky in these situations. We need to come in with the speed and manage it to protect the most vulnerable road users. That's probably the most complicated one, I think. So let me know if you have any questions on that. The next principle is about homogeneity, and that's about having equality in speed and direction and mass at higher speeds. We kind of want to be separating big, fast things from slow little things. Where these things come together, again, speed is critical. We need to lower the speed so that we can have that safe mixing environment. And a crossing is a refuge in the middle of the road. Pedestrians don't have priority. There's no zebra crossing markings. There's no raised platforms. So this truck, which is probably going between 60 and 70 kilometres an hour, is just going to be continuing past the person on the crossing at that speed. So that's a good example of what is not a homogeneous environment. Let me see. Okay, so here in contrast to that is a really good example of like a homogeneous environment. What we're doing is we're reducing the vehicle speeds at the crossing point. We've got the raised crossing. So where these two different kinds of users, the big fast things and the slow small things are coming into contact, we really reduce that speeds and make them fairly similar. And the roundabout combined with crossing is really effective because you've got the two different geometries, the vertical and the horizontal there, helping that. So the next one is predictability. And this is often I see that we kind of think about the function of the streets and whether a crossing is appropriate. We kind of think about the speed and think about those things, but predictability can get left behind, and it explains why some crossings feel really unsafe even when speeds are really low. I just want to show you this video first. So just look, if you look up the hill, you can see it's riding down and you'll see a vehicle coming around. So predictability is all about path users being able to predict their own path of travel and the path of travel of others. So in this previous example, just play it again. It's very difficult for the children to determine which vehicles might be turning into this side road. By the time they know if the driver's going to turn in, is probably when they're on the side road and they don't have time to react to avoid a crash. Technically, any drivers that are turning in there need to be giving way because that's what the roadwork rules say, but there's nothing in the design to make it predictable and obvious that that's going to happen. So Bridget will talk about the SOS and safe, obvious, and step-free, which this is very similar to that obvious principle as well. So this, in contrast to that, this is an example of a similar crossing, side road crossing that's been treated. So it's been treated to lower the vehicle speeds as they enter the crossing environment, reinforce the pedestrian priority, the give way lines, and line marking and signs to reinforce that priority and make it obvious that this is where people are crossing the road. Is anyone else having problems hearing me? No. Oh dear, people are having problems with hearing. Just check. Let me just speak up a bit, otherwise I will grab some headphones. Is that any better?
I think it might be the internet connection.
Okay.
That might be a bit patchy.
Yes. Okay. It is a little bit laggy. Okay, we'll go on and let me know how we're going. I've just heard it was laggy, but it's fine now. How are you thinking?
Yeah, I didn't have like significant difficulty understanding you, but like, you know, it's a participant. So.
Maybe it was when the video was on as well. That might have been.
Yeah.
Yes,
let's see how we go.
Let me see. Users can predict their path of travel. So I think we've gone through that. When we put these crossings in, we also had little videos that we put through the PNC networks through the schools to explain to the children how the crossings worked. And one of the features of the crossing, in terms of it being a different color, the crossing guidance in this situation says to have make the pathway look continuous. So yellow is similar enough to the path, is the theory, that it looks like a continuous facility, to make that obvious to drivers that the path facility is continuous. But we also wanted to have it as a defined color that people could recognize. And so in the training videos, it talks about how drivers need to give way, but we still teach the children to check where it's yellow. And there's a strong theme about yellow in those videos, the yellow on top, etc. So these are examples of making things more predictable. Just understanding. So the next one is about state of awareness, and this is about cognitive limitations in our users. So it's accepting that people using the road network have cognitive limitations. There's only so much information we can take in at one time before things get risky again, and we start to make mistakes, and mistakes are more likely. So the less complicated we can make it, the less likely mistakes are to happen. This is just an example. This is that treated crossing you saw just before. So if we imagine a child, we're about 50 meters away from a school, and they need to think about this vehicle about to turn left in front of them. Technically, that vehicle should be giving way, but it's not a road rule that is often understood. Certainly in Queensland, there's nothing in the design to reinforce that. They also need to think about this vehicle coming up the road that might be turning right. It may be difficult to predict whether they are or not. And they also need to think about this third vehicle. So that's a young, inexperienced user thinking about 3 different directions of traffic. 1, 2, 3. So just as an example, this is my son, and we'll just watch it. Molly? So what happened there is we've practiced that crossing many times and gone through checking in 3 different directions, and often it's the right turning vehicles that he forgets. And what you saw is he checked back to the left. It's really hard to see, so he waits for the crossing supervisors to come out to stop all the traffic because the sight lines aren't good enough with the parked vehicles. Then he remembers the right, and then forgets about the vehicles coming out of the side street, and that's when I say Wally and step in to make that obvious. So it's an example of those, you know, the state of awareness that we're thinking about for a young user. It might be someone with a vision impairment, it might be somebody who's drunk, it might be somebody who's walking a dog as well, or riding a bike and then has to look over their shoulder doing that as well. So that's the kind of thing we're thinking about. I just see that there's a question there about the crossing treatment before, about is there a give-way line on the approach side to the crossing? Yeah, there is a give-way line there as well. It's not technically required anymore, but it does make it obvious, more obvious. Let me see.
And yeah, would a mid-block crossing work better by minimizing traffic volumes?
I'm not sure. That would depend on the context, but it certainly does a great job of making it obvious, creating that break in traffic and reducing the vehicle speeds at the conflict point. I think we need a lot more mid-block crossings in our neighbourhoods, and we'll talk about that in the next few slides as well. Sorry, because I went back there. This is just to show you based on, this is the crossings that were installed around this school. So either side of the school in this situation to treat those type of conflicts. We go up and that gives you in detail. So these crossings, when we talk about those cognitive limitations, we're also thinking about drivers. So what we want to do is set the crossing back a vehicle length from the crossing, from the traffic lanes. That means the driver can just think about the crossing and nothing else at that time. For a driver exiting, they can pause here, check the passes, and then it's a separate kind of task to think about the road users. This is School Road in Blyblye. Yeah, I should have the, yes. So we will talk in session 3, you will hear from our world expert in mind wandering during everyday driving as well. Yes, School Road in Blyblye, I should put the name on that one. Okay, we're going deep into the state of awareness thing here, and this is, I think, my most complicated slide. That is a good question, Aaron. I'll get to that. But anyway, I'll go through this one first. This was a really interesting study, which I only learnt about in the last 12 months, even though it was done in 1998. And so what they did was they were trying to measure what kind of buffer children required between when they could safely cross a road and when a vehicle would come to cross the road. So I think the best way to explain it is just what they did. They had children standing next to a road and they had vehicles approaching, and they asked the children to say when they would cross the road, and they had to say yes, 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 until they felt like it wasn't going to be safe. They didn't actually make them cross the road in these environments, and then at that point they'd say no. So using this data, what they did is they also measured how long it took the children to cross the road as well. So they compared the actual time it took the children to cross the road to how much time they would allow. And what was really interesting that they found is that when in this graph here shows you the grey here is the time distance between when the theoretical and the actual time, the time they estimated and the time it took. And so what we see here is that when vehicles were going less than 50 kilometres an hour, children were leaving about a 2 to 3 second buffer between them being able to cross and the cars coming through. So often when we calculate our safe crossing distance, we don't assume any kind of buffer. And I would think that a 2 to 3 second buffer is probably a pretty good safety margin, given that if you get hit by a car at 50 kilometres an hour, there's a very high chance of serious injuries for a pedestrian. So I think that's pretty good. But what they found as the speeds of the cars got higher, the safety buffer got lower. So if we look at over 66 kilometres an hour here, less than a 1 second buffer. So where the road environment got more dangerous, they were leaving less of a buffer. And there's been similar studies have shown this with adults as well, that people are very bad at predicting the gap, how far a car is away at higher speeds. And as the speeds get higher, that gets more difficult. It's a bit counterintuitive because often we only put these kind of crossings in and assign priority in the lower environments, and we really need to think about what we're doing in higher speed environments as well. May not be appropriate to use a raised crossing, but certainly a crossing that doesn't rely on these road users. It's a different task for the drivers that can be managed with the signage and delineation there. So we had a question there about why not using a zebra crossing in Queensland, and I believe the same as in Victoria, is that or similar in Victoria. In Queensland, bike riders have to come to a complete stop before using a raised zebra crossing. It's different for, in Victoria, they might have to walk their bikes across, I think. I'm not sure what it is in New Zealand. So this guidance around the raised crossings has been defined to be used on cycleways and shared paths. In Queensland, you can ride your bike on the path, so most paths are shared paths. So the final criteria here is forgivingness. So forgivingness, I think of as our, it's kind of like our seatbelt. If everything else goes wrong, this is what stops it becoming a serious injury or fatality. And this is about crash forces. So what we need to do is reduce the crash forces so that it doesn't result in a serious injury or fatality. Are people familiar with using this graph? Is this something that most people have been using or seen, or something similar to this? Great. Yeah. Yeah, we've got quite a few people who are familiar with this. I'll just walk it through very quickly. This is a great thing to just, I almost need to have it in my head when I'm thinking about crash forces. So basically this black line here is showing the chance of a probability of a fatal or serious injury at different crash speeds. So we've got the crash speeds here, down here on the bottom axis, and the probability of a fatal or serious injury on the vertical axis. So at 20 kilometres an hour, we've got about a 10% chance for serious injury or death for if a car hits a pedestrian. If we go up to about 55 kilometres an hour here, that's up around 90% chance of death or serious injury. So as we go between 20 and 55, our chart just goes up. So the chance of those serious injury just escalates really quickly. So managing these vehicle speeds, even if we can't get them to what we would consider a safe system speed, which is kind of 20 to 30 kilometres an hour for a crash involving a pedestrian and a vehicle, getting them as low as we can and as close to that is really important. So that's what creates that forgiving environment. What becomes interesting is that, you know, for these other crashes, often for raised crossings as well, we can help to protect vehicle occupants in other crashes. So if we're reducing the vehicle speeds enough, then our chance of a rear end crash is going to be much lower. So once we get our 50 or lower, it's very unlikely that rear end crashes are going to cause a fatal or serious injury. The adjacent direction crashes, they also are quite a low speed kind of serious crash type. So that can work mid-block because it might help facilitate safer right turn movements and things by creating a lower speed environment if there's a mid-block crossing nearby. That's something I consider. So that's the safe system principles. So when we're looking about where there's risk, we can go through these principles to think about where there's risk and where we might need to address that risk in the system. So it's kind of a theoretical model that we can do that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do our first activity. So we've got a poll for this. So Fez is going to bring up the first poll for the day. Now, what I'm going to get you to do is we're going to watch the video and then you're going to fill out the poll to say, how do you feel about each of these criteria? So the criteria you see on the screen here reflect those 5 safe system principles that we've been talking about: functionality, homogeneity, predictability, state of awareness, and forgivingness. So if you answer those questions or tell us how you agree or disagree with that in relation to this intersection.
And Prue, the poll is ready to be launched.
Okay, right. His attention span's gone at that point. Like, I'm done.
I love the reactions.
It's gone again. Okay, so now if we launch the poll and you can go through this. So yeah, the first one is intersection provides a clear through access function for all users. So you should see that come up now.
Beautiful. The poll is started. We have the first.
Oh, it's exciting watching it.
So I'll give it like through till we hit like maybe 80%, and then
Yep.
I share the results.
Okay.
You see, when I look at your kids there and their sort of, their reaction, I think about the whole system, their whole network. And if we look at the system from their point of view, we're going to be gobsmacked how the system is not including us, children.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Agree. I find this crossing terrifying. It's it would help probably to if I had the volume recorded, the volume, the noise that comes through of the vehicles, that impacts communication.
Exactly. You're right.
How are we going? Yeah.
Good. 75%. I think we should have a consensus by now, but
yes.
78. Okay, I'm ending the poll.
Okay.
Share results.
Now, I just have to remember, I have to close this, don't I, Hafez? Is that right? Or?
To see the results.
I'll just do it. So in terms of, so we'll go through those now. It provides a clear through function or access function for all users. So only a couple of people agreed with that one, or neutral. Most people are disagreeing. Yeah, it's not really, it's difficult to determine. There is that exchange function, but it's also a through function. The speeds are really quite high, so it's difficult to determine. I don't think it does a great job of that. Speeds are similar where users interact, so they're probably pretty different. There's not a lot of speed control happening on this roundabout. The deflection here, if you look at vehicles coming down the hill here, there's not much deflection. There's no vertical deflection, so we've got fairly different speeds in terms of, if we think of these, our path users who are probably going, at 5 or 6 kilometers an hour, and people are probably coming through the roundabout at 40 to 50 kilometers an hour. It's difficult to predict it's easy to predict the path of users. So yeah, for some users, it will be easy to predict that. It's probably for vehicles who are entering the roundabout, that's probably fairly easy, but it's not easy for these path users to predict which vehicles are actually going to be exiting the roundabout that they need to give way to. So one of the problems we often have is that the path users have to give way to all vehicles on the roundabout instead of the ones just exiting at their leg, because it's not predictable. So that's something that can be quite weak for roundabouts. Predictability for path users. Experienced users are not relied upon to judge complex environments. So we've got, in this environment, there's not a lot of redundancy in the system. If these children make a mistake in this situation, the drivers aren't prepared to hang on these users. Crashes are not likely to cause serious injuries. So I think, nearly everyone disagreed or were neutral on that. We don't have the data. We don't know how fast they're going, but I would assume it's quite a bit faster than 30 kilometers an hour. Hard to tell from video. So that's an example of applying these principles, and they're a little bit complicated, but I like the way that they interact, because I think they're quite a rigorous process to go through. They provide enough rigor to understand the environment. Beautiful. So let me see. What was that? Sorry.
Prue, just one comment here, just like Tyson's comment here. Looks like they added a token like cycling lane, assuming riders will use that. And I have a question for you. Usually, I grapple with this conundrum, if you will, that is doing something better or worse than doing nothing, especially when it comes to active travel, when we have lots of resistance to address the whole area or the whole corridor. Sometimes we do something, but that creates more risk, because at some stage people come and use them and they're not fully designed or fully addressed. But if we don't do that, we cannot create the wave of change What are your thoughts in this sort of situation?
Yeah, I think that's it's a really good question. And I will take it back to these safe system principles. I think we have to look at, how it addresses each of these things in terms of, particularly predictability, forgivingness. I think not in terms of, we don't want to encourage users into unsafes on the road. So I think we need to be very clear with what these treatments are. Like, I will very commonly endorse treatments that aren't, don't achieve standards, but they're clearly much better. I really like the safe system purpose, because you can consider how it aligns for all road users and does it make it better or does it make it worse in terms of alignment with safe system principles. So I think that, if we are applying those things that aren't perfect, that's a great way to confirm that it is or not. This roundabouts are really interesting because when we provide bike lanes, often we widen the throat of the roundabout, which increases the vehicle speeds, which is absolutely critical to getting a safer environment for all road users. So, if this was being built now, I'm not sure that, I would prefer to have a narrower throat on the intersection and provide a different merging environment to really reduce those speeds, than to widen the intersection that allows faster vehicles and more serious crashes and things. So, yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Good question. We are going to do one more of these now that we've all got the hang of it. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to watch the video again, and then we're going to apply the principle again, the same questions.
Your internet is a bit patchy, so I hear what you're saying, but I guess a bit.
Oh no. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what I can do about that at the moment. It hasn't.
That's okay. I think I follow what you're saying, and if
Okay.
I hear something, I'll put in the chat room so people understand what you're saying. So
Okay.
don't worry. I think it's okay. And we're close to the
Okay.
coffee break.
Well, how about you bring up the poll and I'll just, okay.
Sure.
Why don't you bring up the poll? I'll just grab another backup thing.
Sure.
Right.
I like this one, Prue, because this sort of, it challenges. The answer is not as clear cut. So
yeah,
it's fascinating.
It's not. Yes. Okay. Shall we bring those up?
We have hit 78. So let's go. Let's go.
Okay. Right.
Share the results.
Okay, so in our second poll, so it provides a clear through or access function for all users. So we've shifted from most people not agreeing to most people agreeing. It's not always clear cut in terms of what's going on, but we've got defined facilities that provide access for all users across all legs. So I'd kind of say it does a pretty good job of that. Are similar where users might interact. We've got kind of shifting. We've certainly got a lot lower speeds than we had in the previous example. Interestingly, I think both these, the traffic data is a bit rubbery, but they have similar traffic volumes in these two environments, but they're very different environments for pedestrians. So we've got, the speeds, we've got some people disagreeing, but a bit more of a mixture in terms of the results here. It's easy to predict the path of travel of users. We've got a pretty mixed in that environment. It's probably, if we compare it to the previous example, it's a lot easier to predict. I find when I use these facilities, I seem to have enough time to know if vehicles are going to cross the road. But there certainly were some issues with sight distance and the vegetation probably for drivers, which might be impacting that as well. I know they've trimmed those now, which is good. Inexperienced users are not relied upon to judge complex environments. So we see a lot more sharing of responsibilities here as well. I like to think of in this environment, the path users are really like the redundancy in the system where we're putting the onus on the licensed road users, and then path users can check as well. The next one is crashes are not likely to cause serious injuries. So yeah, we've got mixture here, but we've got, closer to agreement in that environment as well. We've got lots of elderly users in this area. So we're providing for the most vulnerable, but it's probably as close as you can get to, a safe system aligned treatment in this environment with the roundabout and the raised crossings. Probably make the crossings a bit steeper. So we can see how those two different those examples can relate to these safe system principles here. So there we go, and apply them. So on the Miro board as well, and in the resources for this section, there's a summary sheet, and we have that checklist in the summary sheet, can help kind of prompt you to go through that kind of assessment process. Okay, moving on. I'm going to go to connections. So we've talked about risk, and the next one, connections. So we're going to use the Miro board in the next few slides. There is a link to the Miro board at the start of the chat. If anyone can't find it, just sing out and we can copy it again. Okay, but it might be good to open up that Miro board now. Okay, so in this part, we're going to talk about kind of origin and destination, the network, movement in place, design lines, and how we might think about where connection is needed. Yeah, I like that. The shrubbery picked up on. Yep, they're onto that. They've trimmed that shrubbery in that last example now. But yeah, that's a great reason to say it's not as predicted. So where is connection needed? So we're going to talk about intersections and mid-block and side roads and between attractors. And can anyone tell me where they think this map might be from? I'm showing here at the moment. Fez? Okay. The homework example, no work, Angela. I think we need a prize, Fez. I think that is prize time, Angela McDonald. Okay, I think I'm running behind time, so we better keep going. Okay, so this is the Swan Hill example. This is actually a Strava heat map. So we know people who run and cycle often have this on. It's more likely to be people exercising, but I really like it. I've just put it on the runners at the moment, but it shows to me that in Swan Hill, we need a lot of connection. There's a lot of places where people are crossing the roads at most intersections, sometimes mid-block as well. They're using most of the network. That's no surprise. So where is connection needed? If we think about kind of a street network and things, we have to think about things like bus stops, where there's this risk and where people might want to access the road. This is just an example taken out the front of a school where they actually previously had a school crossing, but they signalised the intersections and shifted it away. We know people walking have very little tolerance for going out of their way to access facilities. And it's a good example here of where, this is what's going to continue to happen. There's a strong desire line, a walking route up the hill there, and we need some kind of connection there. So where is connection needed? It's needed in a lot of places. So that's why we're kind of in greenfield sites trying to talk about where there's risk and where we need connection, and really focusing in this example that, you know, side roads are places where there's often risk. These are important parts of our networks. You know, whenever you need to be able to cross to both the other side of the road. So we're going to do a quick exercise on the Miro board now. I'll introduce it and then we'll switch over to the Miro board. So you're managing an application for a subdivision east of a town centre. The site is expected to double the traffic volumes on the road connecting to the centre. Where might you install pedestrian crossings? So we'll put this on the Miro board. It's on the Miro board. Use a sticky note to show the locations you might consider a raised crossing. Include your initials on the sticky note and a comment explaining why it's needed. So if you just go over to the Miro board now, I'll bring it up as well. There it goes. Anybody lost? Everyone to me. I love the look of this. So we're going to use the sticky notes and put them on this map where you can see the new development over here. This is the township over here. So the town's kind of extends both sides of this street. We're going with our crossings. Anyone going to have, we need these the crossings? Access from paths, yep. Yep, so we've got a lot of crossings going on the side roads. Over here up the new development, we've got some mid-block as well. We're thinking about these side roads and the roundabout as well. Yeah, I think this is a really good point and we're really on to it. I wish you were working in my local development assessment branch. We'd have a much more connected neighbourhood. I'm surprised sometimes by how much effort goes into kind of managing, you know, intersection capacity and the channelized turn lanes and all these things without acknowledging that we're going to increase the traffic volumes on this road and it's going to get harder to cross unless we provide designated facilities for people. So it's good to be thinking about what's going on in the development and it's great to be thinking about how that impacts the rest of the walking network and access for other people in the neighbourhoods. Okay, I think we are almost there. I'm going to let people keep going there. And I will just get rid of this one. And I think, there we go. So just to summarize greenfield sites, we've got lots of options in greenfield sites. So let's plan the network the way we expect it to be used. Let's think about where there's risk in our treatments, our roads, our streets, our intersections. Think about where there's risk, manage that risk where it's needed, think about where we need connection and be generous with that to remember that, you know, it's not just special facilities that require connected. This is an important part of all neighbourhoods. So now we will have, I think we're good. I think we'll have a 5-minute break. We've gone slightly over, but it's just a couple of minutes. I'm sure we can make that up. How's